Hello, everyone. Myself, Santosh Mankala. I've been working with Salesforce for the last 10 years. I'm working on we are working on something called customer experience at MuleSoft, where we want to improve developer and architects, whoever working on the MuleSoft platform, continuously release after release. As part of this customer experience improvements, we are making sure all the common use cases that are touched by all the MuleSoft developers and architects are thoroughly tested before any release goes out. So, for example, if most of the MuleSoft developers and architects might have taken our fundamentals classes, so the fundamentals training, which consists of 13 modules that you go through, and we converted all those use cases, and we automated and running them to make sure there are no issues with each and every release. So as part of this journey, we are also not only looking, as I said, this team is focused on customer experience. This is not only functional experience, we are also looking for how a developer experience or the architect experience. For example, if you are using our latest 7.4.2, you might see in error, in error, in errors, is the error message is readable. All those things, like the minute details. As a developer, we want to make the developer experience better and better. So as part of this journey, we want to take the feedback from the customers who are using the product. So we started this public forum where you can provide the feedback directly. So I want to make sure this is not something for support cases which I'm going to handle, because this is engineering work that we are doing before the product goes out RGA. So like if you want us to focus on some common use case that definitely improve your experience, definitely. So another thing which I want to mention is, we were looking at customer data. We see a lot of customers uses Windows and IE11 and Edge. So we want to improve like that. So our goal is to make the developer and the architect experience better with every release of MuleSoft. And this is a forum where you can give the feedback to us and how we can improve, and so that we can have a win-win relationship both between MuleSoft developers and MuleSoft product team. And to reach me, I created to reach us, we created this link which Rashton is going to share. It's bit.ly/MuleSoft Q3, which will redirect you to our public forum. It's called Technical Customer Experience, where you can share questions, ideas, polls, or the jar files, anything. You can upload files. So anything that you think which will make your life easier with subsequent MuleSoft releases, we want to take that into consideration into our plans, and we want to help each other. Thanks, Royston, for this opportunity. And Greg, it's on to you now.
Yep, sorry, I got logged out. All good? Sure. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Greg Serrano. I'm from an integration consultant from White Sky Labs and partnering with MuleSoft. Today, I'm going to be discussing about how to create a MuleSoft OData enabled API for Salesforce. So, just to give you an overview of what I will be discussing today and how this presentation is going to go, I'm going to be discussing with you an introduction to OData, what it is, what its capabilities, and being a Mule developer, how is it useful to me and to all my fellow Mule developers there? How is it useful to you? What use cases could we apply this service to, and so on? And a short demo showcase as well on the Mule API functionality of OData and how is it consumed and configured in Salesforce. So what is OData? OData, short for Open Data Protocol, allows services to give its consumers more than just data. It's a service that's globally standardized and it's built around technologies such as these three here: HTTP, Atom, and JSON. And similar to ODBC and JDBC, OData gives you a single way of accessing various data sources. So people like us, developers, can build against it since we know what to expect from it, whether we're consuming it or producing an OData service. And it enables you to query data, filter it, order it, or even set a number of items to be queried at a time, and even control what it would look like. So it would fit the requirements of your clients or your consumer for your service. So, we all know that requirements change all of the time. So this OData protocol gives us flexibility when developing or implementing our APIs. Think of it like shopping for groceries. Say you go to a supermarket, you want to make dinner, right? So you know the ingredients, you go to the aisle, check out the ingredients you want, grab all those items, pick them out, put them on a cart, and pay and go home. Then you're done. Well, that's the ideal case when um, making an activity or shopping for groceries. Now, the problem is when we develop an API, that's not usually how stuff go. We get a requirement, um, say I want to get a list of an account, and we have an API for that or an API call for that, and we develop a request, and since that API is built already, it's going to return a certain response, and that response might contain multiple fields like 10, 20 fields, and we only need 5. So us being Mule developers, our bread and butter is transformation. We customize the payload that's returned per the client's requirements. And then say we need additional fields, we do orchestrations, do multiple implementations per that requirement, and send back a response. Now we do this for each client requirement, maybe for a different resource, even though we're grabbing the same details from that endpoint that we are grabbing that data from or that data source. So it doesn't give you that flexible feel. It's If we take it again to the shopping scenario, it's like you're going to the supermarket and you get a fixed cart containing multiple items such as this picture here, and you're forced to take it home and then just grab all the ingredients you want from that, and then just throw everything that there's no use for you away. So it's kind of wasteful. So what OData does is since it enables you to customize how you will query that data and how it would look like, it gives you flexibility. You can say, for this request, I only want these 4 fields. And then a new requirement comes and say, I want only 3 fields and I want it to be in XML format or a JSON format. You can do all of those things without changing anything from your API through just customizing the request from the OData service. So that's the cool thing about that. As a Mule developer, it simplifies our API since we don't have to do multiple transformation per requirement. It makes it easier to it makes it easier for us to manage what data source, what data is coming from this API, since it gives us metadata, and it makes our API flexible. Now, as for use cases, based from my experience from a client, it's very good for managing use cases, generating reports, like managing inventory, managing orders, creating transaction history, and such. So just basically, just when reading data, this is very useful, and you're also capable of creating relationships based from those various data that you're getting. Next. So in an OData ecosystem, there are two kinds of OData services. It may either be an OData producer or an OData consumer. Now, producers are basically services that expose their data using the OData protocol. It serves as a gateway for those data sources. Um, if you're creating an OData producer, you're able to it basically OData gives you um, relieves you rather, sorry, from spending your resources in defining and maintaining data, since you're the one that's formatting the data model of what you'll be returning. You can control if you want to only enable 5 fields to be queried for this API, and then for the next one you can add more to that, so you have control over that. And the consumers are simply applications that consume the data exposed using the data OData protocol. And it can vary in sophistication when implementing an OData consumer. It may be just a simple web browser or a postman call, or you can create a custom application that would create relationships between those data, such as Salesforce, for example. And there are also multiple technologies right now that's adapting these OData protocol, and you can see that from the screen here, are just some of those technologies. So how do we create an OData API? So from a Mule perspective, these are the prerequisites. In order for you to create one, you would need an OData plugin. Currently, MuleSoft is only supporting OData version 2. So, but as of right now, if I'm not mistaken, there's already an OData version 4. So hopefully we'll get more support with that. You'll need a new version 4.1.1, and Anypoint Studio recommended 7.1.4 or later. And of course, Maven. So the OData API components are mainly these files here, the OData RAML, where you have where you do the data modeling, and the API RAML, which is basically your API specification, and the OData library, which is where the OData features are defined, whether you enable filtering or ordering or select feature, you can define that in that library there. And OData also uses a different API kit extension. If you're familiar with Mule, you know that there's a component there called the API kit router. So if you're developing an OData API, it's kind of different to generate the flows rather than the standard way of us generating the flows when we're creating our APIs. Later on, I'll demonstrate that in the demo showcase. So if you check out the right panel, the formatting output, so these format is the format of response. It follows a strict format. You need to, if you got the data list already, you need to transform that into these format here in order for the OData service to recognize it as an OData response. It's strict because it's standardized. If you don't follow this, it would generate an OData. Is this the part where I got lagged out? Sorry. Right. Okay. Cool. All right. So going back again, the OData API components is mainly these three files. The OData that raml that you see there is where you put the data modeling. You can define your entities there. What are the fields that you're going to enable to be queried, um, and basically the data model, entity data model. The API.raml is your API specification, so just the resources that you want to expose, and the OData library containing the OData services, filter, select, top, order by. You can enable those in this RAML file as well. So I was also mentioning that OData uses a separate API kit extension. For Mule developers out there, you're familiar with the API kit router that and how it generates the flows based from the API specification. So OData is has an extension similar to that, but it generates it from the OData.raml. I'll be demonstrating that later on in the showcase. And if you check out the right section, formatting output, this is the format of the response of your OData API. You need to follow this format in order for you to return a proper response. Since OData is standardized, otherwise you might get an OData error, regardless if you have an error if you don't have an error in your implementation. So just to give you an example of what a response would look like, this is one example. So this is a standard OData response. So all of your entries, the data that you've read, are going to be displayed here, including the count if you enable that. So that's it basically for the OData capabilities. Now we're going to proceed with the showcase demo. So what I'm going to show you now is I've already built an experience API and a system API, Mule APIs in that respect, and it's connected to a database from the web, and also going to show you a configuration for Salesforce on how it consumes that OData API. So hold on for a bit. Hopefully you can see my screen. All right. So if we check out here, I have here the experience API and the system API. So, oh, sorry, let me just show you rather this. So I just set up a free DB here. Okay, while that loads, I'll go back here on Anypoint Studio. So if you see here in API, I have here the API spec and the OData RAML as well as the OData library. So let's start with the OData RAML. Okay. So if you see here, I've defined an order entity as well as a customer entity with these following fields. So this is how you define how you do the data modeling. So these are the fields that I want to enable, and similar to data types, you can put in what type this is, whether it's a number or a string, or will it act as an OData key, or if it's nullable, things like that. So we've defined these items here and entities, these are the only fields that is that you can add in your response. If you put in fields or request, or you make a request for a field that is not here in the OData or in the data model, OData will return an error. So afterwards, this API spec is pretty standard. So if you would see here, there's a certain way of how to define a URI parameter for if you have multiple keys. If you would see here in OData, the customers, I've defined two key values here: one customer ID and one ship name. Oh, sorry, that's the order. So here, yeah, here ship name is key set to true. So these fields, this RAML here is actually automatically generated. You don't have to type all these in, which is why it's actually a cool feature of OData for Mule. You just have to do the OData.raml, and you can actually proceed with that. So just to give you an example, I'm going to create a new project. So sample. Now, if you have the RAML file of OData, you can just delete this sample here, delete the API spec as well, and then just copy the entire OData.raml in your project. And once that's in, if you have the OData plugin installed from my prerequisite slides earlier, if you go here to Mule, you would see that there is a generate OData API from RAML types section here. And once you click that, the OData plugin and the API Kit extension will do its work, and it should generate you a new API spec file and your main configuration file. Okay. So if you see here, we have this automatically generated, and all our resources are put in place based on the data model, as well as these main configuration is being configured as well. So that's how easy it is to set up an OData API project, or create an OData project. So let me just, sorry, close this. So once you generate this, then you can start proceeding with, building the API, just as you would a standard REST API with Mule. So just create your implementations, um, create error handling such as that, build your query, send it to your system API or your process API, and just make sure that you build the response. Um, you build the response based on these formats. See the entries, and you put your list of data here. So once you do that, deploy it on Runtime Manager and play around with it. All right. So once that is deployed, so you would see here that there is my experience API and system API are deployed in runtime. So now you can configure your API consumer, which is in this case it would be Salesforce. So here's my Salesforce landing page. And just to show you, here is my database. So we have here customers and orders as well. So we have all the files populated with values that we can play around with. So for Salesforce, in order to configure an OData endpoint, you would need to go to setup first. And in setup, you can search external data sources here in integration sections. And based on your organization's license, you can add at least one OData endpoint or multiple. So here you would see that I've created already this endpoint. So just to show you the configuration. So I'm using Salesforce Connect OData 2.0. This also has a version 4, but since our OData producer is Mule, I'll be using 2.0. So just put in the URL of your OData API. So if you will see here, let me zoom in for you. If you would see here, this is a standard Mule URL, but there is a slash odata.svc in the URL. This invokes the OData service of your API. You would always need to put odata.svc. Otherwise, you will be just calling this as a standard REST API, and the OData services won't work. Right. So once you put the URL, actually, let's put in edit. Okay. So once you put the URL here, you can choose what format you would want this API to be processed. If you want to use XML or JSON, in this case, we use XML. You can put authentication certificates if you want, but for the purposes of this presentation, let's just proceed with the standard call and hit save. Once that's done, what Salesforce will do is check the metadata and create an external object based on that API. So if you will see here, it will automatically create this customer and order external objects. And for example, if you want to edit your OData API and add more entities, that will be fine. You don't have to reconfigure this external data source. You just have to, once you've deployed the API, you just have to click validate and sync, and you would receive the other entities, and Salesforce will automatically create an external object for that. And once that's done, then if you know what to do with Salesforce, you can edit this external objects. For example, you can configure the objects to have multiple relationships. So in this, I've configured the ship name and the customer ID to do external and indirect lookup uh, for these objects here. So customer ID, do an external lookup for external object customer, and indirect lookup for ship name using a custom object I defined in Salesforce, which is product supplier. So you can play around with data and then create your tabs and your views. So in order to manipulate, in order to query that data. So just to show you what Salesforce does in the background, you can call the metadata function here. So I'll be showing that in Postman. I'll do a zoom in for you. Hopefully you guys can see this. So invoking the OData service by odata.svc, just add slash dollar metadata, and you would see, okay, you would see here what the model looks like. So you would see the entity type customers, what fields and data type are those, and if there are keys, what are they, and you would see here the orders as well, and all the fields that are enabled. You can also customize it. Say I don't want to check this out as XML. You can invoke the format feature of OData, and then choose it to use JSON. Oh, sorry. I don't think it's. I don't think it works on metadata. Sorry. Anyways, so that's what it does in the background. So once all of these fields are configured, we can play around with the data now. So let me just switch to Salesforce Classic. So you would see here I've created tabs for customers, orders, and product suppliers. So if we go to customers, hit all. All right. So you would see here it queried the top 10 values for customers, and say I don't want just the top 10. I want 25 records to be displayed on load. You can customize that, and Salesforce actually customizes the query to get you this top 25. So you would see here, um, say I want to create a new view. I don't want to just list all, and I want to see all the customers from this certain company. So I've created a view that will just search for these company name. You can create a new view as well. So in this case, I specify the criteria to just show me the company name, Gourmet Lanchonetes. And yeah, you can customize it here on Salesforce, and querying that data will be will change. The query format will change when once it's received in the OData service. So same thing with orders. Sorry if it's kind of slow. I'm only using a free database website. Okay, so we have a list of orders here. So I've customized this view as well. If you remember, I defined the customer ID and the ship name to be keys and do an indirect lookup. So once I hit this VNet customer ID here, it would generate a query to retrieve a customer using this ID. And once I do that, it will send it to the same API, and I will get a view containing all the fields of this customer. Yep. And these are just the OData entities. You can also you can also create your own custom object, product suppliers, for example, in Salesforce, and create relationships with those kinds with those records from the OData API. So say here, reference 101. So I've defined these record here, product suppliers, based on supplier name Romero Itomilo, and it will do a lookup for orders, and you would see all the orders from this supplier name. So that's how flexible OData can be um, for implementing APIs. All right, and if you have another channel that would probably need or probably require the same data, customers and orders, you can just have one API in and proceed with those requirements, with that other channel without having to do too much changes or rework to your API, which is very helpful cost wise and effort wise as well. Okay. So, guys, that's it for the demo. Everything about OData, as well as the steps on how to create an OData API from Mule, is here on references. You can check it out here on my presentation file. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you. Sure. Hold on. Okay. All right. So regarding the transformation, um, if you guys can see this. Oh, okay. All right. So regarding the data weave transformation, so you can get there is a variable called vars odata, which will contain all the filters, parameters that you add in your requests. Say the select fields that you want to use, the filter, how you filter them. It really depends in the developer on how you will master this request, and based on the data source that you are using or retrieving the data from, you can generate your query. So for this example, since it's very simple, it's just an SQL query. So I just generated an OData query using these select fields here, and based on these remote entity name, which you can get still in the OData variable that it will generate. So you can play around in debug mode. For example, let me try to make a request. Hold on. So I'll fire up a request here. Oops. think I hit the wrong one. Sorry, I hit the wrong one. So if you would see here, the OData fields here on the OData variable, so you would see what fields are involved, and from the attributes, you would see from the query parameters, what is the query string, how does it look like. All right, yeah. So yeah, basically that's it for how you call this API and what kind of parameters you can pass. So you can play around with it. Again, all of these are in the Mule documentation website, so you can do it step by step and play around using debug how these fields are being populated. Guys, Royston, it's actually 1 o'clock here, and I've only reserved the room until 1 p.m., so I might have to step out now.